geopolitics, strategy, and diplomacy.
So on paper, this looks like, honestly, the most routine diplomatic visit you could possibly imagine.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally dressed up as standard statecraft.
Right. Like a foreign leader comes to India, shakes hands with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, poses for some photos, and issues a completely standard statement about bilateral cooperation. It's the kind of Ministry of External Affairs press release you might just, stroll right past.
Yeah, exactly. Specifically, we're talking about the acting president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodríguez, arriving in New Delhi. It's a working visit from June 3rd to June 7th, 2026.
Which is her 6th visit, right?
Yeah, she was here as foreign minister back in 2015 and then vice president a few times. So it seems like business as usual.
But, and this is the core of our deep dive today, if you look closer, she is not coming alone.
Not at all.
I mean, sure, she was originally supposed to be here for an international Big Cat Alliance summit, which, by the way, got deferred because of an Ebola outbreak in Africa, but she kept the travel dates. And she's bringing this massive delegation.
Massive. We're talking the ministers of foreign affairs, economy and finance, science and technology, communication and information, and transportation.
Right. It's like having a friend invite you over for a casual coffee, but then they show up at your house with their lawyer, their accountant, and a moving truck.
Exactly. You don't bring the architects of your entire national infrastructure just for a quick courtesy call.
No, you really don't.
Yeah.
The real question isn't just why Venezuela's acting president is coming to India. The real question is why India is keeping the global energy chessboard wide open for Venezuela right now.
Right. Because there's a lot going on beneath the surface here.
Yeah. We're going to unpack how this single visit ties into billions of dollars in trapped assets, a sudden global oil bottleneck, and a really calculated move to break China's grip on Latin America. And we're pulling all this from official MEA press releases, global financial reporting like Business Standard and Republic World, plus some Indian pharmaceutical export data.
The timeline leading up to this is where the geopolitical reality actually sets in.
Yeah.
Because Delcy Rodríguez hasn't been the acting president for very long.
Right, just a few months.
Yeah, she took over in January 2026 under some incredibly volatile circumstances. Based on the reports we're tracking, U.S. troops basically conducted an operation in Caracas where they captured and abducted the sitting president, Nicolas Maduro.
Which is just wild.
Yeah.
And normally, historically speaking, when a foreign military forcibly removes a nation's leader, the resulting government faces immediate isolation.
Oh, complete isolation.
You'd expect severe sanctions, borders shutting down, the country turning into a total financial pariah.
Right.
But that is not what's happening with Caracas right now.
No, the mechanics of this transition are entirely different. Instead of being shut out, acting President Rodríguez is working in direct coordination with the U.S. Trump administration.
Wow.
Yeah. The U.S. has actually eased the heavy sanctions that previously crippled Venezuela's oil exports. But, and this is a huge but, they aren't just letting Caracas sell oil freely.
All right, there's a massive catch, because how does a superpower actually manage another sovereign nation's oil revenue without, violating a dozen international banking laws?
Well, they use this highly controlled escrow system managed by the U.S. Treasury Department.
Okay.
So when Venezuela sells oil to a country like India, the payment doesn't go to the central bank in Caracas.
Doesn't?
Nope.
Yeah.
It goes into a designated clearinghouse account overseen by Washington. And then the U.S. Treasury dictates how those funds can be used.
Oh, right. Really? So they dictate everything?
Basically, they release money specifically for approved domestic infrastructure projects or humanitarian needs. It's to ensure the capital doesn't fund military expansion or unauthorized debt repayments.
So Washington is essentially acting as this heavily armed financial guardian.
Exactly.
Which brings us to this really bizarre diplomatic twist from last month. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was heading to New Delhi for the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. Yeah. That's the strategic security alliance between the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. And before Rubio even left Washington, he announced Delcy Rodríguez's trip to India. He announced it before the Indian government even put out an official statement.
It was a very deliberate signal. Rubio openly told reporters that the U.S. wants to sell India, quote, as much energy as they'll buy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he explicitly stated they see major opportunities with Venezuelan oil. So the U.S. isn't just permitting this trade, they are actively brokering it.
Like Venezuela's travel agent. Okay, so the U.S. has set up the financial plumbing and they're standing at the register. But why is India sprinting to the checkout counter?
Because they desperately need the supply.
Right. The numbers in the financial reporting are staggering. In May 2026, Venezuela suddenly became India's third largest oil supplier. They pumped 427,000 barrels a day to India, overtaking Saudi Arabia.
And that was after 9 straight months of zero imports.
Yeah, which is insane. How quickly can a country just swap its oil supply? Is it as simple as changing gas stations, or are there massive logistical hurdles to suddenly importing almost 500,000 barrels a day from across the globe?
Oh, it is not simple at all. The catalyst for that massive pivot is the current crisis in the Middle East. India is the world's third largest oil importer, meaning its entire economy relies on this massive, uninterrupted flow of crude.
Okay.
But right now, the ongoing conflict between the U.S. and Iran has effectively closed off the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a catastrophic bottleneck. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is the primary artery for Middle Eastern oil. If ships can't safely navigate that narrow channel, a huge percentage of the world's energy supply is just trapped at the port.
Precisely. So India, facing the very real threat of domestic fuel shortages, had to immediately source alternative crude. And Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, over 303 billion barrels.
But pulling 427,000 barrels a day from Venezuela isn't just a matter of redirecting ships, right?
No, it's a matter of highly specific chemistry.
Okay, this is where we get into the actual hardware of the oil industry.
Yeah.
Venezuelan crude is famously described as heavy and sour. What does that actually mean for a refinery trying to process it?
So heavy means it's incredibly dense. It's almost the consistency of thick molasses rather than the liquid you might imagine.
Wow, okay. And sour.
Sour means it has an exceptionally high sulfur content. If you pump heavy, sour crude into a standard refinery designed for light, sweet crude, it will literally destroy the facility.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the sulfur corrodes the pipelines, and the dense sludge clogs the distillation towers. Most refineries globally simply cannot handle it.
But Indian refineries can. Specifically, the private sector giants like Reliance and Nayara Energy down in Gujarat.
They're uniquely positioned for this. Years ago, these Indian refineries invested billions of dollars to build what are known as delayed coking units.
Delayed coking units.
Right. These are massive thermal cracking facilities that subject the heavy sludge to extreme heat upwards of 900 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is intense.
It is, but it breaks the complex carbon bonds. This allows them to extract high-value products like diesel and gasoline from crude that other countries basically consider industrial waste.
That's brilliant. Because they already possess this specialized infrastructure, India didn't have to build anything new when U.S. sanctions eased. They just turned the spigot back on.
Exactly. It's a perfect matching of supply and capability. The refineries were sitting there basically starving for this exact type of heavy crude to maximize their profit margins.
But this diplomatic visit isn't just about buying new oil to survive a Middle East crisis. It's also about India finally recovering an incredibly old debt, right?
Yes, the corporate ledger here is fascinating. India's state-run oil producer, ONGC Videsh Ltd, often referred to as OVL, has been waiting over a decade to get paid.
A decade.
Yeah. Since 2014, they've had roughly $500 million in frozen dividends locked up in a Venezuelan energy project called the San Cristobal field.
And the reports mention another $500 million in unaudited claims. What exactly makes them unaudited?
So, unaudited claims essentially mean OVL spent massive amounts of capital maintaining the field, but because of the political paralysis and hyperinflation inside Venezuela over the last decade, the state oil company there never officially processed the accounting.
Oh, I see.
The ledgers were just frozen. So you have $1 billion of Indian capital trapped in the Orinoco Belt.
It's basically like finding a winning lottery ticket for $1 billion in a winter coat you haven't worn in a decade.
That's a great way to put it.
But because of the new U.S. oversight, those frozen assets are finally thawing. The catch is they can't just wire $1 billion to New Delhi. Venezuela doesn't have the cash.
No, they have to pay India back in physical oil.
But the infrastructure at the San Cristobal field has been rotting for 10 years.
Which requires a massive logistical intervention. OVL's strategy to recover their debt isn't just to ask for oil, it's to physically extract it themselves.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They're currently planning to ship heavy drilling rigs and extraction equipment all the way from their domestic fields in Gujarat to Venezuela.
Okay, stop and think about the mechanics of that for a second. You don't just put an oil rig on a FedEx flight.
Definitely not.
They have to completely dismantle these massive steel structures, load them onto specialized heavy-lift maritime vessels, sail them across the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, across the Atlantic, and then reassemble them deep in Venezuelan territory.
It is a logistical mountain to climb. They also have to establish supply chains for replacement parts and engineering crews in a country whose domestic infrastructure is, frankly, deeply fractured.
Yeah, but OVL is taking on this burden because the payoff warrants it, right?
Absolutely. By deploying their own technology, they project they can increase production at the San Cristobal field from a meager 10,000 barrels per day to nearly 100,000 barrels per day.
Wow. And that increased output is how they finally recoup their $1 billion.
Exactly.
Let's pull the lens back from the oil fields for a minute and look at the broader geopolitical map. Because these move shipping rigs, the U.S. managing the escrow, India buying 500,000 barrels a day, it displaces a massive player, For years, China completely dominated Venezuelan oil through these debt-for-oil deals.
The Chinese strategy in Latin America was highly effective until this regime change. A debt-for-oil deal functions very much like a predatory payday loan.
Okay, explain that.
Well, Beijing would loan Caracas billions of dollars up front for infrastructure or government spending, but the collateral for those loans was future oil shipments.
So what makes it a trap? Why couldn't Venezuela just pay them back normally?
Because the terms of the loan often dictated that the oil was valued at a rate favorable to China, and almost all of Venezuela's production capacity went entirely towards servicing the interest on those loans.
So no actual revenue was coming back into the Venezuelan economy.
Right. Caracas was essentially locked into a cycle where they could never shop for a better interest rate or sell their oil on the open market.
And the U.S.-led restructuring completely dismantles those networks. By taking control of the financial clearinghouses, Washington has broken the payday loan cycle.
It creates a massive vacuum in the world's most resource-rich country.
Which really begs the question, is India just acting as a pawn here? I mean, is Washington merely using New Delhi to aggressively box out Beijing's influence in the global south?
That's a common read, but the mechanics are much more complex than that. India is acting strictly out of its own strategic necessity.
Okay.
Yes, New Delhi stepping in aligns perfectly with Washington's goal of evicting China from Latin America. But India isn't doing this as a favor to the U.S.
They're doing it for themselves.
Exactly. They're securing absolute energy independence during a Middle East crisis. They're recovering $1 billion in bad debt, and they are establishing a massive industrial footprint in a region they've historically struggled to penetrate.
So it's a marriage of convenience, not subservience. We also can't ignore the OPEC factor here. Saudi Arabia and the broader OPEC cartel have held global markets hostage for decades because they could control supply. But now you have a nation with 303 billion barrels of oil, which is more than Saudi Arabia, operating entirely outside of OPEC's quota system under U.S. oversight.
It completely alters the balance of power. The U.S. effectively has a secondary energy reserve now that it can use alongside its partners to flood the market or stabilize prices if traditional Middle Eastern producers try to weaponize their output.
So Saudi Arabia's primary geopolitical leverage is severely diluted by this new alliance.
Very much so.
Okay, so oil secures the economy, and it explains why the Minister of Economy and Finance is sitting at the table in New Delhi. But you don't bring the ministers of science and technology, communication, and transportation halfway across the world just to sign oil checks.
No, you don't.
So what is the rest of Delcy Rodríguez's delegation actually doing?
Well, they're trying to rebuild a society that has essentially collapsed. While the energy sector is seeing a rapid influx of capital, the domestic reality for Venezuelan citizens remains pretty dire. Humanitarian data shows that over 80% of hospitals in Venezuela are currently facing critical shortages of basic medical supplies and surgical equipment.
80%. That isn't just a supply chain issue, that is a full-blown national emergency.
It really is.
And this is where India's role shifts from just an energy consumer to its moniker as the pharmacy of the world. Because our sources show that in 2023 alone, India exported over $110 million worth of pharmaceutical products to Venezuela.
And that number is set to grow exponentially now. We're looking at companies like Addy Biotech, which are providing much more than just, surplus bandages.
Right.
They're establishing dedicated supply lines for critical, low-cost generic medicines treating cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and severe infections.
But how do Indian pharmaceutical companies actually maintain a supply chain in a country that's been battling hyperinflation and severe political instability? Like, when Western companies pulled out because their profit margins collapsed, how did India manage to stay?
They adapted their financial and logistical mechanisms. Indian pharma companies often mitigate the risk of hyperinflation by pegging their contracts to stable commodities, or they utilize guaranteed letters of credit backed by international Indian banks.
That's smart.
Yeah, and logistically, they customize everything for the local market. They produce bespoke Spanish packaging, ensure flexible labeling, and even manage complex cold chain transportation for temperature-sensitive drugs like insulin.
Wow.
Yeah, they have to ensure it survives the journey from Indian laboratories to a Venezuelan hospital that might literally be experiencing rolling blackouts.
That is an incredible level of operational commitment, and it really highlights how India uses medicine not just as an export, but as a deeply effective diplomatic tool. I mean, if you are the country keeping the hospital lights on and delivering life-saving insulin when everyone else abandoned the market, you aren't just a trading partner anymore. You're weaving yourself into the very fabric of that society's survival.
And the energy sector and the pharmaceutical sector are functioning as a unified strategy here.
How so?
Well, the oil deals generate the high-level macroeconomic alignment and the raw capital. Then the pharmaceutical and technological exports build deep generational goodwill among the population. The transportation and communication ministers are in New Delhi right now to figure out how to replicate this kind of Indian integration across their ports and telecom grids.
It's really a comprehensive blueprint for rebuilding a nation. And this brings us back to the stakes of this seemingly routine meeting. The cost of fuel at your local gas station, the stability of the supply chains that dictate global inflation, and the quiet displacement of China in Latin America. These tectonic shifts aren't happening on battlefield.
No, they're happening at the negotiating table.
Exactly. They are being negotiated right now in conference rooms in New Delhi over agreements on heavy, crude, and generic antibiotics.
The velocity of this geopolitical realignment is what's truly unprecedented. It proves that rigid global structures, like OPEC's dominance or China's debt traps, can be dismantled incredibly quickly when the right economic pressures and alliances align.
Think about the whiplash of the last 6 months alone. A nation went from experiencing a foreign military raid that literally abducted its president to emerging as a U.S.-backed booming energy hub, being aggressively courted by a rising superpower like India.
It's a 180-degree turn.
It is. And if the map can be rewritten that completely, that fast, it really makes you wonder who might be the next unlikely partner to step out of the shadows and reshape the global chessboard.
It's a dynamic that requires us to look very, very closely at the delegations quietly flying into capitals around the world, because the real power shifts rarely happen with a loud announcement.
So the next time you see a headline about a standard diplomatic visit, check who is actually getting off the plane. You're part of the conversation now. Until next time,
drop your take in the comments and subscribe to Hispanic India for high-impact geopolitics that connects India, Europe, and Latin America.